Detroitification. Yeah, that's a word. That's a word that we are using. It means the process that made Detroit just absolutely crumble. The policies that Detroit ended up the way that it did. We're going to talk about that today. Got an article from somebody who lived as a child throughout some of those early years of Detroit just tanking. And it wasn't only economics that tanked Detroit. It was a lot of social policy as well, and fiscal policy as well, that led to its demise from one of the biggest cities in the United States to, oh, yeah, that is a burned out shell of a city that has nowhere to go but up because it had fallen so hard. That's what we're talking about today. Let's get into it. Are other big Democrat-run cities having Detroitification happen to them? Let's talk about it. Here we go. Big city Democrats are repeating the mistakes that killed Detroit. All right. Shots fired, right in the title. I grew up in Detroit. Not me, the author of this article. Actually, just 6 blocks outside it in a small blue-collar town whose name you wouldn't recognize. Detroit was at rock bottom for most of my childhood. Its downtown has since made a minor economic comeback, if only because there was a certain point from which there was nowhere to go but up. But the blueprint for that once great city's destruction is written all over the still abandoned skyscrapers that surround the new stadiums and the vacant square miles of overgrown grasslands that once bustled with houses and families that have since been cleared, demoed, and new houses have not been built because the population of Detroit just shrunk, didn't it? You had that whole slippage of the car industry and manufacturing in the United States. You had that whole thing going on. On top of that, you had a bunch of policy in place by the leaders, such as they were, that basically allowed Detroit to just take a tanking. The old flourishing metropolis that was America's 5th largest city with more than 1.8 million residents was buried under passivity against crime. All right. It's okay. Go ahead and steal from your community. It's good. Yeah. That whole $950, worth of goods that you can take. We're okay with that. We're okay with you taking that. California's policy. So, being passive against crime? Do we see that in Seattle? Yes, we do. Do we see that in Portland? Yes, we do. California? You betcha. The collapse of public education? Okay. Yep. And indifference toward economic realities. Hey, this no longer works here. We're going to have to shift. We're going to have to pivot as a city. We're going to have to make a move to something else. Indifference toward economic realities. That's what we're talking about there. It'll all work out. We'll bail you out. We'll help you out until we don't. And then Detroit just absolutely tanks, right? And becomes just like a war zone, but worse because it's in America and we shouldn't be having that, but we have had it. I mean, a microcosm of that is Kensington Avenue. A lot of it had to do with the steel industry, right? Moving jobs offshore, everything changed. All that whole United States being the numero uno and making the best cars, all the mass produced cars in the United States. And then all of a sudden, things changed, didn't they? You got to pivot, got to be willing to pivot. It's a global economy now and you got to treat it as such. But if you don't, if you have indifference to economics, here's what ends up happening to you. You turn into Detroit. Frighteningly, these maladies of a bygone America have returned in force as tenets of the progressive left from coast to coast. Nearly all major U.S. cities are governed by Democrats, most of them almost exclusively by Democrats for at least 20 years. What are your results? Well, would you send your kids to the public schools in those places? I wouldn't send mine to the public schools in Seattle. No, terrible. But they're still better than a lot of these other areas, right? Would you open a business there? No. Would I buy a rental there? No. And, I'm in real estate. We're supposed to just sling real estate no matter what. Be a real estate whore. Sell wherever you got to go, right? I never really did much selling. That was never my thing. I mainly was an appraiser and then got into the real estate gig just because, you end up selling homes. You buy a home for yourself. You buy a rental for yourself. Super handy to have a brokerage. And then at one point in time, I just, I went hard with Summit Properties and we got over 100 agents and kind of got the company where I wanted it to be. But I talk openly about people. Hey, with the situation in Seattle, in incorporated Seattle, do not buy a rental property there. It does not make sense. You are up against an inordinate amount of rules and regulations that make owning a home in Seattle under tenant laws basically impossible to not just lose your ass at some point in time. That's because of all the policy City of Seattle has put in place. When you've got a socialist and a true real life socialist, member of the Socialist Whatever of America, that's how you get policy like that, right? So if you wanted to destroy once a great American cities, what would you do differently from what the Democrats who are governing them are doing now? I don't think you'd have to do much, would you? I mean, a lot of these cities are economically on a wildly different path than Detroit was. That is a given. Because even like Portland has got a bunch of economic opportunity that Detroit just clearly all of a sudden the writing was on the wall, but nobody wanted to address it because addressing it means they had to make a move, and they didn't make a move. They just let the city run into the ground, right? That's literally what happened. Whole bunch of politicians, long line of politicians came in and said, we're going to change things up. Good Lord, this is on a freight train going to hell. And that's what happened. These are not frivolous or purely ideological questions. For example, in DC, there were 79 carjackings last month, apparently a monthly record, compared to just 8 carjackings in April of 2019. The district council reacted to spike in the carjackings by voting to reduce the penalty for carjacking. Oh man, we're sending too many people to jail or to prison for carjacking. Better cut that down. That is some racist stuff you got going on over there. Is that what they did? Kind of sounds like it, right? We can't have people in jail for carjacking. Reduce that sentence. That's just too harsh. Carjacking, that is some scary stuff. Get your car jacked and you're in the car, your kid's in the back seat. How many times do you hear about that? Carjacked with 2-month-old and, baby seat and back. Horrible. Even doubling down and overriding the mayor's veto to reduce the penalty for carjacking. I mean, that's just insanity, right? It's just insanity. We've gone way too far. And now these cities, including Seattle, are suffering for it. And you know what? I think a lot of folks don't have much stake in their own city. They're okay with things just kind of going sideways. It's just a place to live. They don't have any real pride. They don't really care about their city. They have zero civic pride. Graffitied all up, trash everywhere, tents, homeless. It's all good. Drugs, it's all good. Because, if they did have civic pride about their cities, they wouldn't allow that kind of stuff to happen. But those aren't the kinds of folks that are voting in this kind of nonsense, are they? Yeah. Businesses and residents are fleeing even beautiful cities such as Portland, Oregon, and Seattle because their crime and homelessness problems are out of control. Portland had a big exodus last year. Seattle actually, unfortunately, had the biggest in-migration in 2022 per the Census Bureau. It's the biggest growing city in the United States. But that's because we pull from a large area and not everybody is living in Seattle proper. Seattle proper itself, it's got its whole litany of of issues. And, I see them multiple times a week. And that's kind of what the author is talking about because of their crime and homelessness problems are out of control. Amazon. Here's a good example. Amazon is moving employees, 2,000 of them from downtown Seattle right over here to Bellevue because safety issues and a bunch of other stuff like that. That's the fleeing from beautiful cities like Seattle. So that big city you love, the one you visit on excursions growing up, just isn't the same place as it was when you visited a couple of years ago for that baseball game. You might not want to go back there now, or at least not bring your children. So I had a conversation this morning with somebody who'd sent me a couple of emails. And one of them was that they had friends from the Philippines that had been to San Francisco in, I think, about 7 years ago. And then they came here just recently and they could not believe what they saw. They couldn't believe that the stores were basically empty and it was middle of the day and so many of them were closed up. They couldn't believe kind of just the street conditions that were going on. And these are people that had been to this area 7 years ago, and the degrade of what they saw happening, the degradation of what they saw happening. They're like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And that's a lot of what we're talking about. You're talking about graffiti, litter, drugs, allowing lawlessness to happen, just the whole, homeless people, I'll live wherever you want. It'll be fine. All those policies, together have created situations that are the Detroitification of these cities. That's what you got going on. Economics aside, economics in Seattle, we don't have the economic issue that a Detroit has. But we've got similar policies. We got similar jokesters running the city council that'll drive it right into the ground if they get a chance because they do not care. They do not have a stake in their own city. They're okay with how it looks. They're okay with, guy's carving his leg up out on the street with a kitchen knife. That's okay. It's all right. Yeah, at some point in time, he'll probably get some rehab going or something. Not really sure. So the latest trend is for even posh downtown areas such as Chicago's Magnificent Mile. This is a really good example here. Chicago's Magnificent Mile to experience teen takeovers. Oh, hey, we've got a pillow party. Isn't that cute? Oh, wait a minute. It's actually teen takeovers is a new euphemism for senseless riots and looting by delinquents who are assumed to be juveniles, although few are ever arrested to confirm that. Throw them in jail. Let them sit there. Let them sit there till their parents come and bail them out. Give them big bail. That'll maybe teach them a lesson. No, it won't, right? Because their parents don't know what they're doing and their parents don't give a rat's ass either because their parents don't have a stake in their own city. Could care less. Because if they did, they wouldn't be letting their kids just run willy-nilly throughout the city doing whatever the F they want. And it's enough parents where you're like, hey, that's an entire city deal going on, right? It's kind of like the smash and grab. I mean, you see that on large scale and you're like, oh, okay, you've got something going on here. It's not just a couple of kids doing this. This is large groups of kids. So this, like many of the other crime trends in big cities, is a result of prosecutors refusing to attach serious consequences to crime. You got to throw people in jail. You just do. And you got to throw them in jail for a long time because you just got to get that riffraff off the streets. I'm sorry. That's what you got to do. Period. You might have studies that say otherwise. I don't care. Throw people in jail and throw enough of them in jail that everybody else looks around and goes, oh, crap. Maybe we need to hold off on some of that. It's the only thing that's going to work. It's the only thing you got going on. You might show me a study. I don't care. I just don't. This is my podcast. I can say whatever I want. And if you don't like what I'm saying, there's more. Yeah, you can go listen to those. But now you're probably here because you agree with what I'm saying. So it turns out that criminals are really, really good at figuring out just how far they can push things without facing consequences. They show their ingenuity every time a big city DA decides to tolerate shoplifting, abolishes sentencing enhancements for gun crimes and gang membership, declines to jail chronic bond violators, or fails to press charges even against career criminals accused of violent crimes. How many times do we see somebody that's been arrested for their 57th felony offense and then let go and they go out and kill somebody? That happens a lot. That shouldn't be happening. But we've got this soft on crime approach in the name of equity, just not the people who are, having their lives ended by these folks, these career criminals. Not a lot of equity for them in the equation, but we're not worrying about that. We just got this soft on crime approach that's gone wildly sideways. Crime levels have elevated. And so, the criminals they're not dumb. They're not dumb. They're going to go to cities where they can get away with this and run their drug businesses because that's what they're doing. So I don't really blame the criminals. I blame the politicians that allow it to happen. I blame the city council members who allow it to happen under the name of, we're creating an equal opportunity for everybody here. It's like, yeah, how about the law-abiding citizens? Where is their equal opportunity with this in equation? Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that one, right? Because we don't have one. And the current spike in crime is occurring amid record vacancies on urban police forces. Chicago reportedly lost 19% of its police force under former Mayor Lori Lightfoot. She was terrible. And the exodus will continue likely under her defund the police successor. Yeah. Chicago, what are you doing? You are literally in the process of Detroitification. That's what you're doing. That's what you're doing. And voting in that kind of knucklehead, you got one way to go and it ain't up. It's down. You're headed that direction. Washington, D.C. has lost 2 sworn officers for every new officer is hired since October of 2020. Well, as the United States, we collectively just pooped on policing as a profession, didn't we? That whole defund the police thing. I mean, what a stupid, stupid concept that went nowhere except negatively, right? Yeah. For a net loss of nearly 12% of the entire force during that period. Washington, D.C., net loss of 12%. And it stands to reason, who would even consider taking such a stressful, low-paying job in a city where the political class is so eager to throw you under the bus? Why would you do that? Why would you take on that job? As for the educational collapse from Detroit, which has never recovered, that is being repeated too. Maryland, where I now live, the author, is ranked as the second most educated state, according to a recent study by Wallet Hub. Yet its principal city, Baltimore, has 23 public schools where not a single student, not even one in the whole school, tests proficient for math at grade level. Even worse. So not one, you got 23 schools where the kids, not one of them, they're just not being taught basic proficiency at math. Even worse, Baltimore has almost the same number of public schools that just barely missed that list because 1 or 2 of the students attending out of the entire school can do basic math, meaning a whole bunch of other schools are right there with them. But they got one genius kid who's like, yeah, all right, some people can just do math. They just pick it up, like Goodwill Hunting. And the kid studies on his own. He was just a genius, right? He's a genius. Some people are geniuses. So you got some geniuses there that can do the math. And so statistically, it takes them off this list. Otherwise, you'd have just even more public schools where the kids are just like, learning? What's that? Maryland's Democrat-controlled government reacted to this news by moving to cut funding for a modest private school voucher program established by the former Republican governor, which might have given at least a few children a path out of the school system that haven't improved in a lifetime and probably never will. Path out of school systems that haven't improved in a lifetime and probably never will. That's what that's supposed to say, despite my reading. So it probably won't. And that's sad for those kids, right? So even when you've got a private school voucher program, they're going, we're going to cut that. We want them all to be uneducated. Lack of education for all. That's equitable. That's what we're doing. Yep. Conservatives and Republicans did not cause the problems these cities are facing. They didn't have a chance. Democrats have dominated all of these jurisdictions for decades. There is no Republican mayor of Portland or Seattle or LA or Chicago or Baltimore to point the finger at. It's so true, isn't it? Man, we haven't had a Republican governor in the state of Washington since like early 1980 something, right? Just all Democrat. That's basically all I've known as an adult. But you watch other states and you go, okay, that's how you do it over there. Not my state. My state's filled with just a bunch of morons. But that's, what are you going to do? New York has gotten worse lately, but it still isn't quite as bad a shape as some of the others. Maybe it's just a coincidence that the Big Apple recently enjoyed a 20-year period without a Democrat as mayor. But give it time. Sadly, it's well on its way. Right? Doesn't it feel like that's the way it's going? Man, Rudy Giuliani to the rescue. Yeah. America's big cities are extremely sick right now. Their illness will keep getting worse as long as voters keep electing people who follow the same failed policies that result in Detroitification. Yeah, not good, right? Okay, so Derek Hunter, he's the author of the Derek Hunter podcast, and former staffer for the late Senator Conrad Burns, Republican, Montana. All right, so yeah, I talk with a lot of you, and by talk, I mean we communicate, whether it's via text or email or Discord channel. We're on Reasonable Plus. Got that whole communication thing going on there. It's free. You can check that out. I talk with a lot of you, and initially kind of when I started getting into this whole sphere, I didn't believe the Detroitification was really happening. I thought that was an over-exaggeration, but I think a lot of elements, especially elements that this article points out, you can't really say they're not happening. You can't say, all right, well, yeah, but Detroit had this happen and this city is having this happen. Now, you might not have the same economic, disaster take place in a current city, but you've got some of the same disastrous policy being implemented, or, economic not recognizing what's going on. Like in Seattle, like if we just let the city of Seattle council, they would tax Amazon out of Seattle in its entirety. And we'd have all these big businesses leave, which has kind of happened with Amazon. We literally had tax Amazon. Wait a minute. That is bringing in the most revenue to your city and state as any business. Well, we don't like big business because we're socialist, because socialism has always worked so well. And their argument would be, well, capitalism is not working for the workers of the world united folks either. Like, okay, but this is America and this is kind of what we're doing, used to do, trying to do, not going all that great, right? But if you take policy like that and just try and tax the big business, they will leave. They will leave. And so it's this, lack of understanding of how cities run, who funds them, what's going on, long-term, what's going to happen. And I think a lot of that happens because a lot of the politicians who run big Democrat-run cities, they don't have a business background. I hate to say it. They've never owned a business. How many politicians have I talked about that make all these mistakes, that if they had just owned a business, if they had that background, they wouldn't be making those mistakes because they simply don't understand how things actually work, or they don't want to. And because they have basically zero, stake in their own city, they're okay with it looking the way it is. Portland's okay with it looking the way it is. But then you've got old timers, you got old school folks who are like, this isn't the Portland that I invested in when I was young. No, but you voted in the policies that have resulted in the Detroitification of Portland. So that's kind of where things have gone. So it's taken me a while to understand that some of the things that killed Detroit are the exact same things that, these big cities are experiencing. And a lot of them right across that whole left coast, right? The West Coast. Yeah. You make the argument. All right. Yeah. But you got Chicago. You got all these other cities that it's been impacted too. But most of them, they don't have Republican leadership. And you've got Florida just going guns out. They are going. Population, in-migration, businesses moving there. Texas, same thing. I mean, you've got massive amounts of people moving there to the point where Texas and Florida are going to get to, I don't want any more of you. We love you all. However, you know what I mean? But don't bring your liberal opinions here because gosh darn it, don't mess with Texas. You got some of that going on. It's changing the way that Texas is as a state. It's changing because you've got so many people coming to Texas, going to Florida, going to Idaho. Idaho doesn't want any more people. They don't like me talking about Idaho because then that brings up that Idaho exists and they just want to keep it the way it's been, which is, value system that is wildly different than Oregon, wildly different than Washington, at least the western portions of both of those states. You've got Greater Idaho. It's like, okay, yeah, Greater Idaho going to take, 3/4 of the state of Oregon and merge it into Idaho. So it's the policy that killed Detroit on top of economics. Things change. Bottom line is I didn't really believe that Detroitification would impact things as much as they have here on the West Coast. It's happened in real time, and we are watching it unfold in real time. Elevated crime levels, things going not in the right direction, homelessness exploding, drugs exploding, overdoses exploding. And those numbers, retail shopping theft, organized retail theft. I mean, you've got all kinds of stuff like that going on. And we saw this happen, not we, but so many of you out there have seen this happen. And I think it's because some of you lived it a little bit more than I did. I've kind of just been coming up and hearing about it versus seeing it. And you guys have seen it and you guys let me know, hey, this happened. This is what I'm seeing. So I appreciate that opinion. And that's why it's important to, for me to listen to you as well, because there are lived experiences that I think unless you've been there, you don't really believe. And you're like, okay, yeah, but the whole auto industry thing in Detroit. Yeah, but it was that on top of a whole bunch of policy decision made by folks who probably didn't run businesses, because if they did, things would be wildly different. They go down all these other things and it's like, okay, that's not going to help. That's not going to help. Kind of like defunding the police. If you had a system in place that was equal to or greater than our current policing system, and you could show me how this would work and it makes sense, all right, I'll listen. But you don't. And from that standpoint, that whole defund the police system, that whole defund the police big thing, that big move that, that everybody was just so worked up about, just so all hot to trot about. Yeah, that went wildly sideways, didn't it? Because in every one of those cities, you got less cops now. And so who does that hurt the most? Yeah, the lowest members of your society. How's that working out? Yeah, it seems to be working out okay because like in Chicago, you just voted in the same kind of knucklehead. You get what you pay for. All right. That's it for me. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being part of the Seattle. I almost said that again. News for reasonable people. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.